I'm Lauren. I grew up in this really old house. Nothing changes much, and everyone's houses are way older than they should be and still standing. A lot of them had those cracked stone basements and old radiators that clanged all winter. Ours did too. My parents still live there. I don't anymore, obviously. But for a long time I did, because moving out where I grew up is expensive, and I worked nearby anyway, so there wasn't really a reason at the time. The house itself always had kind of a weird feel to it at night. During the day it was fine though, totally normal. My mom kept everything really clean all the time, so it never had that abandoned, creepy house feeling. She was one of those people constantly wiping counters and vacuuming for no reason. If you walked in, there was always either laundry going or some candle burning that smelled like vanilla or apples. My room was upstairs at the back of the house, facing the neighboring property. That house next door was even older than ours and sat closer to the tree line behind both properties. The guy living there was named Brett. He was in his late 50s. He looked older because he smoked constantly and was one of those really pale people that somehow always looked sweaty. He lived alone from what I knew. I never saw family come by or anything except one older truck every couple months. Everybody in the neighborhood kind of knew him as the weird guy. He'd stare too long when people walked past. He never really smiled. If you waved, he'd sometimes just look at you without saying anything back. Stuff like that. My dad said Brett used to be normal years ago before his wife left him or passed away. I don't know which because people said different things. I first noticed him really paying attention to me when I was 19 or 20. I used to stay up late all the time because I worked night hours at this grocery store pharmacy. Sometimes I closed, sometimes I opened, so my sleep was completely messed up. I'd sit in bed watching stuff on my lap until like 3 in the morning with the window cracked open because my room got insanely hot upstairs. A few times I saw movement outside near the fence line between our yards. Then one night I actually saw Brett standing there. Standing still looking toward the house. I remember freezing because it startled me. Like when you don't expect another person to be outside late at night and suddenly there's just a shape there. He was close enough where I could tell it was him because the back porch light from his place lit part of his face. I closed the curtain right away, and after that I started seeing him more. Sometimes he'd just be near the side of his yard looking over. I told my mom about it, and she got annoyed because she already hated him. Apparently, years before I was old enough to remember, he'd gotten into arguments with neighbors over property lines and weird stuff like that. My dad kind of brushed it off, though. One night, I was getting changed after showering, and my blinds weren't fully shut. There was this little gap in the middle. I looked over and saw somebody outside my window. I screamed and dropped onto the floor because it scared the absolute hell out of me. I remember my heart pounding so hard it made me nauseous. My dad came running upstairs thinking somebody broke in. When I explained what happened, he went outside, but nobody was there anymore. He went over and talked to Brett. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw them from our kitchen window. My dad looked pissed. Brett mostly stood there with his hands in his pockets, barely reacting. After that, things stopped for a while, or I just stopped looking outside as much. Honestly, I started feeling stupid about the whole thing, because people around town treated Brett more like a sad, lonely guy than some dangerous creep. Even I started wondering if maybe I exaggerated things in my head because it was nighttime and I already found him unsettling. Then like 8 months later, he died. It wasn't some shocking thing. He was older and apparently had health problems. I remember feeling weirdly relieved, which sounds horrible now that I say it out loud. Not relieved somebody died, just relieved I wouldn't have to think about him anymore. That sounds awful too, honestly, but whatever. It's true. After he passed, the house next door sat empty for a while. And an empty old house honestly changes the feeling of an area more than you'd think, especially at night. No lights on. The yard started getting overgrown really fast too because nobody was maintaining it. There was this broken gutter on the side that banged during windy nights, and it drove me insane. I started sleeping with my curtains fully shut after that, which sounds backwards because he was dead by then, but the empty house creeped me out more for some reason. The night My parents were asleep already, and my younger sister was downstairs on the couch because she had friends over earlier and accidentally fell asleep watching TV. It was around midnight or a little later. I'd been watching Prison Break in bed for hours because I got addicted to it at the time. I specifically remember that because afterward, I couldn't watch that show for a long time without thinking about this. At some point, I paused the episode to go shower because I had work early and figured I should just do it then, instead of waking up earlier in the morning. Our upstairs bathroom was right across from my room. Tiny bathroom too. I got in the bathtub and just sat there under the water for a minute because I was exhausted. Then I started getting this really uncomfortable feeling. And I know how fake that sounds because people always describe things like that in horror movies. It felt like somebody else was in there with me. Not physically. I mean, I didn't see anybody. The curtain wasn't moving. It was just this overwhelming feeling that there was another person extremely close to me in the bathroom, like right beside me, almost pressed against the tub. I remember opening the shower door fast because I thought my sister came upstairs, but nobody was there, and the feeling stayed. That's the thing I still can't explain. Usually when you realize nobody's there, your brain calms down. Mine didn't. I still felt like somebody was standing inches away from me, even though the bathroom was completely empty. I shut the water off and got out. I was embarrassed with myself because I felt panicked for no reason. I kept checking behind the shower curtain, even though it was glass doors and you could literally see through them. I went back to my room and locked the door. Then I sat there trying to distract myself with TV again. For an hour, things were normal. Mostly. I still felt uncomfortable. I remember my head starting to hurt though, like this pressure behind my eyes. I figured it was because I was tired and staring at screens too long. The fan in my room kept making this clicking sound too. Every few seconds it'd click and slightly wobble like it was going to fall over. It was irritating me so bad that eventually I muted the TV for a minute just to listen to it because I thought something got stuck inside the fan blades. While I was sitting there, I got this sudden pain in my scalp. Like somebody grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked it hard. It genuinely hurt. My whole head jerked backward from it. I yelled because it shocked me so bad and immediately turned around expecting someone to be behind me. Nobody was there. And I know people are going to think my hair got caught on something, but it didn't. I was sitting upright in bed with my laptop in front of me. There was nothing behind me except the wall and my pillows. I could still literally feel the soreness on my scalp where it happened. At that point, I started fully panicking a little. I grabbed my phone because I was going to call my mom upstairs, even though she was literally down the hallway, and I looked up. I swear on everything, this happened exactly how I remember it. There was a man on my ceiling, not standing obviously, but like attached to it, bent wrong, looking down at me, and it looked exactly like Brett. Trust me. Even typing it out makes me feel dumb. It sounds like something from a movie, but I saw him. I know what I saw. His face looked weird. Weird because of the angle. His eyes looked locked onto me. That's the part that stayed with me the longest. The eye contact. It didn't feel dreamlike at all. It felt real in the way normal things feel real. And then he moved. He dropped straight down toward me. I genuinely thought a full-grown man was about to land on top of me. I remember throwing my arms up and screaming so loud my throat hurt. I closed my eyes because I thought he was literally going to crush me into the mattress or grab me. But nothing hit me. No impact. I opened my eyes and my room was empty. I jumped off the bed and I almost fell because my blanket got wrapped around my legs. I still remember the laptop hitting the floor and my headphones yanking off the side table. I ran straight into the hallway screaming for my parents. I mean, genuinely terrified screaming where you can barely breathe, right? I could barely even explain it because I was crying so hard at that point, and honestly, I think I was in shock or something. My dad thought somebody actually broke in. He searched the entire upstairs. Nothing was there. I remember my dad getting frustrated because he thought I had some kind of nightmare, but I was fully awake. That's the thing that bothered me so much afterward. I wasn't drifting asleep. I wasn't half dreaming. I'd literally been sitting there watching TV. My mom could tell how serious I was, though, because apparently I looked completely pale. She kept touching my face, asking if I felt sick. I think at one point she thought I was having some kind of panic attack. I ended up sleeping in my younger sister's room that night. Actually, not even sleeping really. I don't think I slept more than like 30 minutes total. The second I went back into my room later that morning, I got that same horrible feeling. Nothing happened. I didn't see anything, but it felt wrong in there. I stood there grabbing clothes for work, and I could barely stay in the room long enough to get dressed. I avoided sleeping in my room. My sister hated it because I'd come into her room late at night with blankets and pillows and wake her up accidentally. She was younger than me by 4 years and thought the whole thing was creepy, but also kind of interesting in the way younger siblings do. The weird thing is, during the daytime, I could almost convince myself I imagined it. Like seriously. I'd sit there thinking the headache caused some weird hallucination, or I fell asleep without realizing it. I spent hours Googling stress hallucinations and sleep paralysis, even though I wasn't asleep or paralyzed. Then nighttime came, and I'd immediately feel terrified again. Because things kept happening. That's what makes this hard to explain. It was small stuff that slowly got under my skin. I'm a woman, 32, and this happened a little over 4 years ago. There were woods behind my place and then a long 2-lane road that eventually connected into town 15 minutes away. The house itself was a rental. Old split-level house from the 70s. I only rented the lower part because the upstairs had water damage the owner was supposedly fixing eventually. So basically my whole life was downstairs. Living room, little kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and a laundry room that connected to the back door. That back door is important. My life was really repetitive around that time. I liked being alone most of the time. I had a boyfriend before that, but we broke up like 8 months earlier. So after that, I was alone in the house most nights, except for my dog. But my dog died 2 months before this happened. Cancer. Honestly, I think that part made everything worse afterward, because if he'd still been alive, maybe things would have gone differently, or maybe I would have at least had warning somebody was outside. He barked at everything. I remember that whole week. It was early November and suddenly freezing out. One of those weird cold snaps where it goes from normal fall weather to 30 degrees overnight. I had this crappy space heater in the living room because the landlord never fixed the vents properly. I'd wear hoodies inside constantly. It was a Thursday. Fridays were usually slower at work, and I remember thinking all day, just get through today. I got home around 5:40, watched YouTube for a while. I specifically remember watching videos about people restoring old arcade machines, because I went through this random phase where I watched that stuff constantly, even though I know nothing about electronics. Around 8, I took a shower and put on sweatpants and one of those oversized shirts you end up sleeping in eventually. The weather got bad later that night too. Really windy. You could hear branches scraping around outside, and every once in a while something would hit the side of the house. I kept muting the TV to listen. Around 10:30, I locked the doors. After that, I sat on the couch watching some true crime thing. I had one lamp on in the living room and the kitchen light over the sink. The TV was pretty low because I hated loud TVs at night. I was also texting my friend Ruby off and on because she was complaining about a guy she was dating. I was comfortable enough that I almost fell asleep on the couch at one point. I think it was midnight when I first heard the sound. Sounded like the laundry room door hitting the wall lightly. I thought the wind pushed it open somehow, even though I knew I locked it. I muted the TV again and listened. I heard another sound. Slow footsteps. I thought the landlord came in or something weird like that. He'd shown up unannounced before to check something once. He came around the corner from the laundry room into the kitchen area first, and my brain didn't process it. He had a black ski mask on and a dark jacket. Gloves. I remember the gloves because they looked wet. He was holding what looked like a handgun down near his leg. I froze completely. I know they say fight or flight, but mine was neither. It was like my body disconnected. I stood there staring. He wasn't huge, average height, White guy from what I could tell around the eyes. The ski mask covered everything else. He walked into the living room slow and pointed the gun at me. Then he said, "Sit down." That was it, like somebody telling you where to stand in line. I sat down immediately. I didn't even think about it. I sat on the couch exactly where I'd been before, and he pulled this chair from the little dining table over across from me. He sat down facing me like 6 feet away, and nothing happened. That's the part nobody understands when I explain this story. Even the cops kept trying to make it make sense. Robbery, home invasion gone wrong, but it didn't feel like any of those. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask where valuables were, didn't touch me, didn't even really look around the house much. He just sat there pointing the gun toward me, not constantly directly at my face. Sometimes it lowered a little toward the floor, but always enough that I knew if I moved suddenly, maybe he'd react. I remember my arms getting cold because I was too scared to pull the blanket back over myself. I thought he was waiting for someone else, like he thought another person lived there and he was waiting for them to come home. My brain kept trying to explain it. After like 20 minutes, I finally said, "You can take whatever you want." He didn't answer. I said it again later. No answer. The TV was still on quietly during all this. Some commercial came on at one point, and I remember thinking how insane it felt hearing normal TV sounds while this was happening. I could hear the heater clicking on and off too. I tried looking at his eyes a few times, but it made me panic worse because he never looked away. Barely blinked either from what I remember, just staring straight at me through the holes in the mask. At one point, maybe an hour in, I started crying. He still didn't react, didn't comfort me obviously, but also didn't seem excited by it or angry. Nothing. That made it scarier. This felt wrong in a different way, like I was stuck in some weird paused moment that wouldn't move forward. Eventually I asked if I could use the bathroom. He nodded. I remember standing up really slowly because my legs felt weak. He stood too immediately when I stood up, which scared the hell out of me, and he followed me halfway down the hall before stopping. I shut the bathroom door and immediately thought about locking it and climbing out the tiny window, but the window barely opened and I knew he'd hear me anyway. I stood there shaking for probably 2 minutes. I considered calling 911, but my phone was still on the table in the living room. When I came back out, he was sitting again exactly where he'd been before. I sat back down because honestly, what else was I going to do? Time got really strange after that. I kept looking at the microwave clock in the kitchen because I could see it from the couch. 1:17, then 1:43, then 2:26. I started wondering if maybe he was high or mentally ill or something. Once I noticed his breathing sounded shaky, like nervous breathing. There were moments where I thought he was going to leave because he'd shift forward in the chair or glance toward the kitchen, but then he'd just settle back again. At some point, he finally spoke again, very quietly. He asked, "You live here alone?" I said yes. Then he asked if anybody was coming over. I said yes. I lied. That was the entire conversation. After that, it got even more tense because now I knew he wasn't mute. He was choosing not to talk. I kept thinking about whether the gun was real too. It looked real. Black handgun, medium-sized, I guess. I don't know guns at all. But there were moments where I'd stare at it and wonder if it was fake, because who does this for hours without doing anything? Then immediately I'd think, if I gamble wrong on that thought, it's over. So I stayed still. Around after 3 in the morning, I think, I'm honestly not positive anymore, he suddenly stood up again, no warning. I thought, okay, this is it. Now something happens. But instead he just looked toward the kitchen, then back at me. He kept staring at me. Then he said, "Don't." That's all he said. I immediately started apologizing even though I didn't fully know what I was apologizing for. I said I didn't see anything, and I don't know you. I was rambling. He didn't respond. He just kept holding the gun pointed loosely toward me. Then after another minute or so, he walked into the kitchen. I heard drawers opening, cabinets. And weirdly, that almost calmed me down because it was the first normal person thing he'd done all night. I could hear him moving stuff around in there while I sat frozen on the couch trying not to cry again. He came back holding one of my bottled waters. That sounds ridiculous to focus on, but I still remember it because it was so unbelievably weird. He unscrewed it, drank some, then sat back down across from me like we were just two people awake late at night. I couldn't stop shaking by then. My teeth were chattering from adrenaline or cold or both. At one point, he noticed and pushed the blanket from the other side of the couch toward me with the gun. It made him feel human for half a second. Like some part of him noticed I was cold. I pulled the blanket over myself slowly and just sat there holding it against my chest. Eventually, he stood again. This time, he looked toward the hallway and asked where my bedroom was, even though it was obvious. Only one door was closed. I pointed. He walked down the hall and disappeared into the bedroom. I could hear drawers opening again. My brain immediately jumped to he finally decided to rob me after all. But when he came back, he wasn't carrying anything. Nothing looked disturbed afterward either except one dresser drawer slightly open. Then he sat back down again. I remember starting to feel exhausted at some point, mentally worn out, like my brain couldn't stay at maximum panic for that many hours straight. There were moments where I'd drift almost into this numb state, and then suddenly remember there was a masked man with a gun 6 feet away from me, and my stomach would drop all over again. The clock eventually said 3:48, then 4:11. Outside the windows, the sky started turning that dark gray color right before sunrise. The living room slowly stopped looking so shadowy. I could make out more details on his clothes. Black work boots, gray hoodie under the jacket, mud on one knee. And honestly, I think daylight changed something for him too. He started moving more, looking toward the windows, adjusting in the chair. The whole night had felt almost suspended outside time, but once morning started creeping in, it was like reality was coming back. Then suddenly he stood up for the last time. I immediately tensed again, thinking, okay, this is where something happens. But instead he just pointed the gun directly at me and said, "Count to 100 after I leave." And then he walked out through the kitchen. I heard the back door open, then shut. That was it. You may ask, why didn't you run immediately, or call the cops immediately? But my body genuinely would not cooperate. I sat there staring toward the kitchen for what felt like forever, because I was convinced he was still outside waiting to see if I'd do something. I remember counting in my head but losing track constantly because I couldn't focus. I got to maybe 40-something and started over. Then I thought if I counted too fast, he'd know, which doesn't even make sense. Eventually, I got up and locked the back door, even though it was already damaged by then. The frame was split near the latch. He probably used a pry bar or something. My phone was still on the table. I picked it up and dialed 911. They didn't find him, obviously. The weird part was trying to explain the story afterward because I could tell even they thought it sounded strange. I lived in this little rental place for a year and a half when this happened. One of those areas where every house kind of sits too far apart for neighbors to notice much. There were woods behind almost every property out there. At night it looked pitch black past the backyard. I was working at a tire warehouse at the time, and money was kind of all over the place for me. The house was small, one floor. The landlord painted everything this ugly gray before I moved in, and it already looked worn out again by winter. The driveway went down the side of the house toward this detached garage I barely used except for storage. The side yard was narrow, like 6 feet between the house and this line of bushes and trees that separated the property from the woods behind it. At night, that side of the house got insanely dark because there wasn't a street light anywhere near it. I'd get home around 6 or 7 depending on overtime, play games for a while, then sleep. Weekends I usually drove into town or went to my friend Rob's place to watch fights or football or whatever was on. Around that same time, me and my ex had been broken up for 4 months. Her name was, let's call her Rachel. It sucked, but it wasn't screaming or cheating. We just fought a lot toward the end, and eventually it got exhausting. We still talked every once in a while after. Mostly normal stuff. Sometimes she'd text me asking if I still had one of her hoodies or things like that. I didn't hate her, and I don't think she hated me either. That matters. The night I'm talking about definitely cold already because I remember wearing this old hoodie inside the house instead of turning the heat up. It had rained earlier too. Everything outside looked wet and dark, and there was wind moving the trees around off and on. I got home late that night because we had inventory at work. I remember eating Chinese food while watching videos on my TV. Around 10:30 or 11, I took my trash out to the bin near the garage. I went back inside, and probably an hour later I heard somebody say my name outside, like someone trying to get your attention without waking everybody up. Just my first name from outside near the front porch. I thought Rob stopped over or something because he used to do that randomly. I listened for a second but didn't hear anything else. Then like 20 seconds later, I heard it again. I looked through the little window beside the front door, but there was nobody there. My porch light was on and the driveway was empty. I remember standing there feeling stupid because part of me thought the TV said something that sounded like my name. But I heard it again. James. I opened the front door pretty fast after that because I thought someone was messing around. There was literally nobody outside. The road in front of my house was empty too. I stepped out onto the porch and looked around, but I didn't see anybody walking away or hiding or anything. Then I heard something from behind the house. Not a voice that time. I suddenly got this really bad feeling I can't explain right. So I went back inside and locked the door. I checked all the locks. Pulled the blinds shut in the kitchen because suddenly the windows felt way too open. For about an hour, nothing happened. I tried watching TV again, but I couldn't focus. Once you get nervous, every sound starts feeling important. I kept thinking some drunk guy walked through the yard by mistake or kids were screwing around. There were teenagers that sometimes drove through those roads late at night. I caught the sound of someone approaching, right beside the house. Slow walking. Once you hear footsteps that close to your window, you know the difference. It was on the narrow side yard near the kitchen, not trying to hide at all. I turned the TV volume completely off and just listened. The footsteps stopped for a second, then started again. I moved toward the kitchen window carefully. The blinds were closed but slightly bent near the edge, so I looked through this tiny gap toward the side of the house. There was somebody walking there. I could see a shape moving slowly along the side yard, head slightly down, dark clothes. It's hard to explain how unsettling it looked because they weren't acting normal at all. If somebody accidentally wandered onto your property, they'd usually leave once they realized. This person was just walking slowly beside my house. I yelled through the window asking what the hell they were doing. The person stopped moving, didn't answer. I remember feeling this wave of panic hit me right there because normal people answer. Even if they're angry or drunk or whatever, they say something. This person just stood there in the dark, completely still. Then after 5 seconds, they walked farther toward the backyard and disappeared behind the garage. I backed away from the window after that. My heart was going crazy. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Looking back, I should have called cops immediately, probably. I checked the back windows after a few minutes, but didn't see anybody. The woods back there looked pitch black. Then, 10 minutes later, I heard something again. Same side of the house, this time faster. I looked through the kitchen window again and saw the same figure walking back toward the front of the house. Definitely a man from the shape and size of him. I could tell he was looking toward the house while walking. I yelled again, asking who he was. No response. Then he said Rachel's name, like he knew her. That scared me worse than anything before that, because suddenly this wasn't random anymore. My stomach completely dropped when I heard it. I remember saying, "What?" out loud. The guy stopped walking. Then he stepped closer toward the kitchen window, and I finally saw a part of his face for maybe a second. Thin, looked older than me. I mainly remember his eyes looked weirdly wide open. Then he smashed the window. I heard him running immediately after that toward the backyard. I grabbed this flashlight I kept near the kitchen and ran to the front room, thinking he might circle around to the door or something. But when I looked outside, I didn't see him anywhere. I called Rachel immediately. I asked her straight up if she sent somebody to my house or if one of her friends was messing with me. I didn't genuinely think she did, but hearing her name out there completely threw me off. She sounded genuinely confused. She asked me what the guy looked like. I told her honestly I barely saw him. There was this long pause after that, where I could hear her breathing, but she wasn't saying anything. Then she asked if he was tall and skinny. I said, yeah, probably. Then she said, James, I think I know who that might have been. She asked me if the guy was wearing a dark hoodie or jacket, and I said I thought so, yeah. I couldn't tell exactly. It happened so fast, but from what I saw, probably dark clothes. Then she goes, I didn't tell you because I thought it was nothing. That immediately made me mad, because at that point my kitchen window was cracked, and there was some stranger outside saying her name in the middle of the night. I asked her what the hell she meant, and she started explaining that for the last few weeks she'd been noticing this guy around randomly. At first, she saw him sitting in a car outside her apartment complex a couple times. She said she kept convincing herself it was coincidence because the guy never actually approached her directly, never threatened her, nothing like that. But she noticed him enough times that it started freaking her out. I remember asking why she never called the cops. She said because she didn't have anything solid to report. And I kind of got it. If someone just keeps appearing places but never talks to you or touches you or anything, cops usually don't do much. Still though, hearing that right after somebody smashed my damn window? Oh man. I called the cops and yeah, they didn't find anything. Rachel said, apparently the guy first showed up a month after we broke up. She said he looked familiar, but she couldn't place from where. Then after that, she started seeing him more. She asked me if I remembered this older customer from the store where she worked part-time before. She described this skinny, quiet guy that used to come in near closing all the time. Barely talked except to ask weird personal questions. At first I didn't remember him, but eventually vaguely I did. I only went into that bookstore a few times while we were dating, but I kind of remembered some awkward dude hanging around too long. Rachel thought it might be him. At one point I even asked if she maybe accidentally encouraged the guy, and immediately felt bad because she looked genuinely hurt by that question. She said she barely ever spoke to him besides customer service stuff. I apologized pretty fast after that because honestly, Rachel wasn't the type to play games with people like that.